Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third session of Pivot, presented by W North Conference. I'm Heather Odendahl, co-founder and CEO at W North. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, W North is a global community of women who are aiming for or already on a senior executive leadership track. W North hosts an annual live conference in Whistler, taking place October 28th to 30th this year, and dozens of events per year across our chapter cities, which are Vancouver, Toronto, New York, London, Seattle, and San Francisco. 2 years ago, we created an online hub and membership called the Members Club at W North. We now have over 400 members from across North America and the UK. We present every month professional development workshops curated for our members and leadership masterminds, which are curated groups of 5 members and a facilitator, as well as dozens of virtual meetups. We're excited to announce that we will be launching a brand new platform next week. If you're interested in joining the waitlist to be notified when enrollment opens up, I encourage you to visit our website, wnorthconnect.com. This morning, I am excited to moderate our panel, which is Leadership Lessons to Support Working Parents During COVID-19. As a mother of 2, I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and our world got turned upside down 4 weeks ago when simultaneously in the same week, we had to postpone our W North conference, which was meant to be this week in Whistler, as well as getting a notification that our kids were going to be home from daycare for an indefinite period of time. This is just my story, and there are many stories of working parents across the world right now who are navigating this new reality. I'm really thrilled to have our panelists today to dive into some really great discussions around this new reality. Before I introduce everybody, I want to just cover off a couple logistics. We are going to reserve some time at the end of the discussion for some questions from the audience. I really encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box at any time during the session, and we will work to answer them. And there is also the chat, so if you have some comments or feedback, feel free to put in there, but questions should go in the Q&A box. So I would like to introduce some of our panelists that will be joining us today. Mita Mallick is the head of diversity and inclusion and cross-cultural marketing at Unilever. Mita's efforts to build an inclusive culture are being celebrated. Under her leadership, Unilever is gender balanced at manager level and above. Unilever was named a #1 company for working mothers by Working Mother Media in 2018. She has also co-created the first of its kind cultural immersion series to increase cultural competency of marketers, training over 500 marketers to date. I will introduce each of our speakers with a question, an opening question, and we will go through and we will start with Mita. So Mita, I really wanted to sort of dive in. I've been relating so much to your blogs around your experience of having a family with 2 working parents at home, as well as 2 children to homeschool. And you've said before that we can't expect their at-school schedule to translate perfectly into a learn from home schedule, because it just doesn't. And the same could be said about the standard work week, from the number of meetings, the length of meetings, the expectations. I would love for you to share a little bit about your experience right now. In addition, what changes you have had to make your standard work week work during these COVID-19 days.
Well, thank you, Heather, for having me, and thanks for those kind words. I've been sharing pretty frequently as we're in week 5, day 5 of remote working, virtual schooling, and a pandemic. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old and a partner who's also working from home and has a busy career. And I think I remind myself that this is all through the lens of privilege as well. I'm very lucky that I have the privilege to work from home and that I have food and shelter and we have our health. So I think that's important to remember, that we do hold this conversation through the lens of privilege. And I remind myself, and I'm grateful for all the blessings that we all have. I think in terms of the changes I've had to make, well, I am really envious of anyone who has that perfect color-coded schedule on the whiteboard. You've seen some of them in social and Instagram, and that didn't work for us from the start. I think the schools have been wonderful. The teachers deserve a lot of credit and kudos, and they've been sending a lot of things along the way. And that magic that happens in a classroom with friends and teachers doesn't translate to home. So I think when it comes to balancing our work schedule and our virtual remote learning schedule, we're taking it day by day. I think the only things I know is we get up and we have breakfast. We try to have some signals of what a school work routine would look like we pick out our clothes, we have breakfast at the table, there's snack, there's lunch, there's some semblance of a routine. But if they don't do their art class at 1 o'clock, it's okay, right? It'll be okay. So I think those are some of the things that we've been balancing. And I think we'll talk more about this, but just from a work perspective, I think this idea of standard work weeks are gone. Core operating hours for companies are gone. It is on a day-to-day basis of what your individual core operating hours are and what your capacity is. And I always say to my team, what's that one thing that we need to get done today, and go from there.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And I would like to introduce Mark. So Mark Gasparito is the president of Gasparito Group, a boutique consultancy that provides clients with practical and evidence-based leadership solutions. Mark has leveraged his strategic and tactical leadership approach to help private and public sector organizations increase their members' leadership and resilience, strengthen their teams, and enhance their organizational culture. During his highly decorated 2 decades of military service, Mark served in key leadership roles in international hotspots such as Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Haiti. Now, Mark, I was really drawn to your work as it's focused on, as it was focused on systems and protocol founded in your military background around what do we do to survive and thrive during these times, and especially with children. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience from working from home with kids and introduce the audience to your survival tent routine concept.
Well, Heather, thank you very much for the introduction, and good day, everyone. It's my pleasure to be connected with you on this virtual panel. As introduced, I come from a military background, and in 2017, I retired as a colonel with 20 years in the Canadian Army as a combat engineer. And I now run a leadership development firm called the Gasparito Group, which tries to translate many of my team's operational experiences into business solutions. And in terms of what I do when I'm not traveling or running experiential learning events, really my personal and professional life has not changed dramatically since the pandemic because I was working from home before. But the greatest impact, without a doubt, has been on my 2 teenage daughters in terms of their social life and now being cooped up with their parents. And so COVID-19, I'd tell you, as a former soldier and commander, I've seen a similar movie before, and not to the same scale, and apart from localized disasters, certainly not here in Canada. But in certain ways, the shelter in place and the physical distancing protocols makes it feel like I'm on an operational deployment. And on a deployment, depending on how dangerous the environment, there are many constraints on what you can and what you cannot do. And your freedom of movement is limited, and you must take precautions to mitigate the risks. Very much how many of us are feeling right now. And as a result of the pandemic and what was known about its specific risks, I instinctively instituted, or I advocated for, various mitigation measures at home. And I say advocated because I don't pretend to order around my wife or even my kids, certainly not now that they're teenagers, because they wouldn't listen anyway. But it dawned on me after a few days of this routine that it was very much like an Arctic tent routine that I had experienced in the military. And that then became the genesis for my blog of the same name. So I suspect, what what's gone on in my household and what's gone on in Mita's are polar opposites based on some of those initial comments. But those people who are campers or backpackers will be familiar with the term. And in the military, we used it during winter warfare training, where we live in cramped 10-person tents. And the routine, it means all the repetitive activities that are done individually and collectively to survive in the elements and to ensure the accomplishment of the mission, whatever that is, all the while living in very close quarters in a tent. And so this routine, it provides purposeful work to every member of the group, and it lays out the ground rules for living together, because our realities have changed. And so you need to discuss what those changes are. And this ensures that no one slips into a state of boredom, that the work gets done in a way that allows everyone to contribute, and that everyone can live together. And I think all of these things help sustain morale, which is our greatest asset during dark times. And so I've described the mission in terms of our family mission as doing our part to help flatten the curve and to survive the pandemic intact as a family. And based on my experiences in uniform, the best way to gain and regain control during a crisis is a purposeful routine. And that allows you to control what you can control and to maintain normal processes under stress so you can keep doing the easy things easily. And this is meant to save capacity to deal with the novel or the extreme aspects of a crisis. So to give you a sense of what my family's survival tent routine looks like, and I go into great detail in my blog, including the rationale behind each step. Well, everyone wakes up no later than 8:30. So for me, that's sleeping in, but for the girls, that means an alarm. And they make their bed, which is not something we normally enforced. So this starts the day off with a task completed and one that emphasizes tidiness, which is important when you're trying to tidiness, cleanliness, combat a virus. We then intake and log our temperature to establish a baseline. This is something I did in Haiti when I was posted there for a year. And that allows you to identify the start of a fever, which could indicate an infection. We also take a second reading before we go to bed. And then we have a daily morning brief, which I chair. I secretly, I find this the best part of the day. I don't think my family does. But we share information about the pandemic, and we use it also as a forum to combat any rumors which are running rampant based on social media and very politicized news sources. We then plan and coordinate our day from chores to homework to physical fitness and meals. And at first, this brief was taking 30 to 40 minutes, which was way too long to keep people's attention. And so now we have it down to 10 to 15 minutes, and it's pretty slick. And the rest of the tent routine for the day is flexible. It's very flexible, and it provides ample time for both individual and group activities, and activities that are meant to attend to all four aspects of our humanity. And so the body, the mind, the heart, and the soul. And I think based on that balanced and comprehensive approach, it really helps our resilience. And the next mandatory activity is supper, which is followed by forced family fun, which is likely some military humor. At first, the activities were a bit forced, but now the girls get to choose them all, and so they're quite fun. And this routine has evolved based on some lessons learned 5 weeks in and some consensus-driven adaptations. And so far, I think it's worked reasonably well. Monday to Friday, we now take the weekends off. That's my tent routine.
Fantastic. And I'm looking forward to diving into getting a bit of perspective on how that routine, if it changes or how it can be adapted for young children as well. So stay tuned for my question on that. Esther. Now, Esther Wojcicki is a keynote speaker in our October conference, and I'm very pleased to welcome her today. Esther is the author of the acclaimed novel, How to Raise Successful People, and the founder of the Palo Alto High Media Arts Program. She was named the 2002 California Teacher of the Year and has received the Gold Key by Columbia Scholastic Press Association. Esther is also famous for teaching a high school class that has changed the lives of thousands of kids, inspiring Silicon Valley legends like Steve Jobs, and raising 3 daughters who have each become famously successful. Now, Esther, I would love to start your opening question off to find a little bit more out about if you were doing an extra chapter of your book that was just released a year ago, How to Raise Successful People. Well, actually, the first thing I would love for you to do is introduce the audience to your trick concept. And then in addition, tell us what your additional chapter, if you were covering COVID-19, would say.
Well, first of all, thank you for that great introduction. And I'm really happy to be here. And I really like what, is it Mita? Mita said and what Mark said. And I think that structure is really important at this particular time, even though maybe the kids don't want to have any structure. So actually, the last chapter of the book would be talking about, it's in line with what the book already talks about. And that would be how to give your child as much control of their day within structure that you can. And so it sounds like it might be really difficult to do, but I think as you set up maybe blocks of time, and just like Mark has this forced fun at the end of the day, I love the term, it's pretty hilarious. I think within forced fun, he already gave you a clue of what you can do, and that is the kids can pick what the activity is within the forced fun. So what a good teacher does and what a good parent can do in this situation is to create the structure, and then within that structure, give the kids control or some control. So something that Google just came out with today, it's very kind of them to do that, is something called Teacher Approved Section on the Google Play. So if you go to Google Play and you see Teacher Approved Section, you will see hundreds of apps, and they're all ranked according to, you know, what the teacher thinks is good for, and, you know, what grade level, and even down to kindergarten and maybe even preschool. So I think, you know, I know most parents are like really fearful of picking something. They're like, oh, maybe I picked the wrong thing. Maybe this will help you pick the right thing. And I think it's a good start. And there's also another thing that Google has done. Sorry that I'm so Google focused, but I'm connected to Google, so I know it best. I know Microsoft also has some great products too, which I'll talk about in a minute. So they have another one called Google.
Here's a matching Google result.
Oh my God, my computer's talking to me. It's hilarious. I think it's listening to me. So there's one that is called Teach at Home. And you just, with the @ sign, teach at home and then learn at home. Those are two good ones that help parents also find good things for their kids to do. The number one thing that students miss, and I was just on a faculty meeting this morning with 200 other teachers, and the number one thing students are upset about, and whether they're, you know, in first grade or whether they're in 12th grade, is their friends. They miss their friends. So any activities that can be collaborative, where 2 kids are working together or 3 kids are working together, that is going to make a huge difference. And so it's, what is bad is if a teacher assigns something where the student has to do it alone, because it's hard for kids to work alone, unsupervised without their teacher present. I think that's easier in the classroom, but it is it is really difficult in this virtual world. So in my particular case with my students, so I teach journalism and I have a large classes. What they're doing is they're still continuing to write and publish stories even now. They upload it to their websites. There's about 10 different websites. And I think the reason that they're doing such a good job is because they're working with their friends, you know, and then they want to be online and they want to be there. The second thing students complain about that I can just tell you is that they're missing out on graduation, or they're missing out on the prom, or they're missing out on all these activities in the summer. And I don't know what we can do to help them recoup those experiences, but I know at Palo Alto High School, we're going to try to have a virtual graduation. I hope other schools do something like that as well. It's a tough situation, and we need to acknowledge to the kids that it's tough, and we give them a lot of credit for helping us cope with the whole situation. So that's the chapter would be, you know, how to cope, it's the anti-coddling chapter, because those kids, they have to really work to make it work for them too. So yes, I think we'll all get through it. It's just a challenge. And so we're going to rise to meet those challenges.
For sure. And in addition to the families and the leaders that are at home with kids, there are a lot of people have joined on this call that do not have kids that are leading teams with kids. So one of the questions that I really wanted to kind of get stuck into is around, in your opinion, 1 month in, what are some of the ways that corporate leaders and corporations, coworkers can best support the working parents? Now, I know, Mita, there's a number of systems at Unilever. Maybe you want to open with some suggestions there.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think first is about having an open dialogue and embracing that on your team. Everyone I say is on their own COVID-19 journey. Mine is of a working parent, working mother. We have other individuals who are isolated and alone at home. Everyone's in their different journey, and not one is harder or better or easier. It's to respect each journey and understand it. So just to be open about where you are. I'm very open, and I role model as an executive. I think that's important because I'm struggling. I've got a full-time demanding job. My husband does as well. And while I love structure, it doesn't always work every day. Right now, we negotiated that I'm on this call till 2 and I have coverage, but that changes every day, especially as there's different things coming up. So to be flexible with that, I think is important. And the second piece is really supporting flexible work hours. We talked about this at the beginning of our conversation, but this idea of core company operating hours no longer exists. To be really open about, as an employee, as an individual, what your hours look like that day. I have certain team members whose daughters are going to nap for that hour to hour and a half, 2 hours in the afternoon, when there's a big chunk of time this individual can invest and do work. So to be really open and respectful on that. I think number 3, whether it's Unilever or any organization you work at, is prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. And all of a sudden, the things that seemed important no longer seem that important, because it's really, again, when you're talking to your teams, thinking about what are those 1 or 2 or 3 things that you have to get done today to move the business forward. And the rest can wait, quite frankly. I think 4 is about really staying in constant communication. I think we have to be careful not to micromanage people. And just because we can't see someone doesn't mean they're not doing work. But at the same time, for me as an individual, I will check in and let people know, like, this week was spring break. We survived. It's Friday. I'm glad the teachers got some time off, and they did send some special Zoom links and things like that. But it was a tough week, and I was pretty open that things changed versus, week 5 versus week 4. And then I think finally, no matter where you're at, just be kind and supportive. If my son or daughter bust in to the Zoom call, given the nature of this call, I'm sure no one will make a comment and just wave, but just to be kind and generous to each other. And I think also really being cognizant of the people who don't have children. you don't want them to become the work warriors, right? And so this idea of just because we're at home right now, we have all this additional time, we almost need a new phrase. We're working from home, some of us remote working, virtual schooling during a pandemic. So there's not a lot of additional or extra capacity.
That's great, Mita. And I think, thank you for making that, very clear at the beginning, like we're all in our own pandemic journeys. There's loneliness, there's so many other things at play for different people. I personally am very grateful for the love and the joyous moments that I'm getting from my kids right now. And that's what's keeping me happy and motivated. And so there are so many positive things about having children around that, and we try to FaceTime with our, grandparents and stuff to bring that joy and spread that around. So Mark, I would love to get some feedback from you as well in terms of how corporations, because you are now working in leadership development in corporations. So I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Thank you. And I'll echo 2 points that Mita brought up. And I think number one is to empower flexibility throughout the system. And this allows individuals to juggle often competing demands, as was mentioned, based on very personal realities. And the competing demands of work and family and personal time were once much more separated in time and space. And so now they're conjoined. So I think 2 practical ways to do that is adapting that work rhythm, especially virtual meetings, to account for daytime family needs. So my kids are teenagers now, so it's not something I have to contend with, but I have a team of 10, and the only time we could find to connect all of us, all 10 of us, was Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, because some of them have day jobs, other day jobs, some of them have young kids, and that's after bedtime. So I really try to work around everyone's schedule and see what works. And the second one is communications discipline. So when are your people on the clock? Because now core hours, as Mita said, really don't exist. What time zones are they working in? What is reasonable now in terms of how long it takes to respond to something? And what rules apply to your various means or channels of communication? So my team's dispersed across the province of Ontario and soon the country, and we all have different schedules. So the rules that we have is an email, you have 24 hours to respond. A Google Hangout query, we say you need to respond within the day. But if we're checking in on each other personally, which we do often, then we'll use text. So we don't use text for business, and we don't use a Google chat for personal stuff. So we keep those things separate. And if there's an emergency or if we need information quicker, then we'll call. And those are the protocols that we've set up. And we believe it's really taken the stress out of being beholden to all of your devices and the need to check and answer messages 24/7.
100%. So Esther, I have a question around, so homeschooling is a big part of what a lot of parents are working on right now. And so many of us at home are feeling like we're failing them on the educational homeschooling front, as we may not have as much time to execute the plans. Depending on the school, the programs are different. But what advice do you have for parents with a limited time to support their children? We'll share some of the resources you mentioned before, but was wondering if you had any additional advice.
So one of the most important things for kids to feel is that you trust them and you respect them. So I have this acronym in my book that I think works perfectly right now for the situation we're in. It's TRIC, stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And this is what I did in my classroom. This is what I did when I was raising my children. And this is what works today, because you cannot micromanage your kids. I'm telling you, it doesn't work. You know, they get mad and they don't learn and they get upset, and it's just crazy. So if you work with them, if you collaborate with them, say, you know, I want to make sure that you're going to get all the math that you need. Here's some suggestions for what you might do, either from your teacher or from you, the parent. And then say, which one of these do you think you want to work on? That just that little question, giving them some choice. It makes it's so simple, and it makes a huge impact. So there's actually 3 things. They need to work on their math work. They need to work on some kind of literature. And then it would be great if they could do something connected with science, if they can do those 3 things. And so if they are part of the team that chooses what to do, they will do it, especially if they're doing it with a friend. So I would see all these little kids have some kind of friend, and they're all suffering the same way together. So put them together and say, let's see what you guys can do. And then maybe you can write about it. Give them all like a little notebook. I'm sure you have something around the house. Let them write about it. You know, I know they all print today. Okay, let them print about it. And then keep track of this and talk to them about it. And if they don't do so well on one day, say, no problem. You know, you can do better tomorrow. So iteration is also part of my structure in my class and with my daughters. Whenever they didn't do something well, I was like, okay, no problem. Just let's do it again. And no one does anything right the first time anyway. I mean, even as a professional writer, you know, I never write it the first way perfectly, ever. So when kids know that, I think they're more willing to do it. And I think just giving them choice, I know parents are like, you have to do this now and whatever. If the fact that you are trying to tell them what to do all the time, no one likes to be told what to do all the time. No one, you know, and you could just try it out on a 2-year-old, you know, they will refuse to put on the clothes that you tell them to put on. So just, you know, work together with them. That's the number one suggestion I have. And I have 10 grandchildren. So we're trying this out on all 10 of them. And well, it works, let's just tell you that. And they range in age from 18 down to 10 months. And they're all on this program.
Fantastic. And I see Mita's nodding her head because you've been writing weekly blogs about your experiences, and you've been very honest about the fact that, you know, some of this stuff is going to happen and some of it's not. So I'd love to get your perspective, echoing some of the sentiments that Esther said.
So I should preface this by saying I was raised by a tiger dad, and somehow I married a tiger dad. So my husband is very, very focused. He should talk to Mark and Esther, but very, very focused on schedules. And actually, to what Esther said, it's backfired a bit on us. And that's what we kind of in week 2 sort of course corrected. I mean, some of the things that we do, like every night my husband and I sit down and go through our schedule the night before. And so yesterday was, hey, I have commitment from 1 to 2. So we go through and make sure that there's child coverage, care coverage. And then we know we have to flex during the day. So if my CEO calls me, he's gonna take over for momentarily. And then when it comes second to what Esther said about the school routine, especially with my 7-year-old, my husband would be like, this wasn't done by 3. And all this stuff had to be done, like the math problems had to be done at 10, and this had to be done at 12, and this by 2, because we're following the beautiful color-coded school schedule. And all of a sudden when I said to my husband and I said to Jay, I was like, you know what, here's your schedule. You just got to finish it by dinner. And we'll have increments and we'll have breaks and we'll have lunch and you'll get a TV show when mom and dad are both on a conference call and can't win that negotiation. And it's worked really well, because suddenly he's like, you know what, I'm going to check in occasionally, but you've got this, right? I think for my 4-year-old, it's really, really tough at that age. I think it's really difficult. I think that one of the things that Esther mentioned that's worked well for us is creating social connection, because she's a bit shyer than her brother, and so she had done really well in preschool and was very social, and now all of a sudden we're isolated. So doing Zoom calls one-on-one with friends. It does not work when 20 of them, 4-year-olds, are doing circle time or just sort of mayhem. But the one-on-one, and we ended up shipping my 4-year-old niece a game called Step in It. I won't say much more, but look it up. It's a pretty funny game. And then my daughter has it. And so over FaceTime, they will play it together. So those are the small things that we're trying to do. I think, unlike my husband, I think if, if they repeat preschool and second grade, they'll be okay. And I'm not trying to make light of that, because I know when there are parents, I'm not sure how old Mark's kids are, but senior year is a big deal, graduating. There's a lot of things that we're grieving right now. But at the same time, I'm just trying to be it's gonna be okay. We'll take it day by day.
Oh, yep. Unmute yourself.
Oh, unmute myself?
Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
Okay, I just want to remind all the parents out there that are worried. This is what Albert Einstein said. Play is the highest form of research. You can look that quote up. And what we don't do is let our kids play enough. We're so worried to keep them on schedules doing things that we prescribe that they forget how to play. Play is the foundation for creativity, by the way. So, while your kid might not be doing exactly what you want, and like Mita and her husband, maybe maybe he's a little concerned, just remind him of this quote from Einstein. Your child is doing some research. That's why they're playing.
And Esther, I remember you were speaking about boredom and the importance of boredom. Can you touch on that for a second? Because I've been thinking a lot about that with my 4-year-olds.
So being bored, we don't let kids be bored anymore. We structure every minute of their day. And even when they were in school, Monday is violin, Tuesdays, tennis, Wednesday. So they have no time to be bored. Boredom is the mother of creativity. You do not learn to be creative when you're busy every minute of the day. And so there was a big New York Times article about that. And then, I came up with this independently, and then I was like, oh, so happy the New York Times thinks the same thing. And then I saw a few other articles about that. So don't worry if your kid's bored. It's not your responsibility to entertain them. It's their responsibility to figure out how to entertain themselves. Their creativity scores were going up. So that's one thing that I think is really important for parents, to keep them from feeling guilty, because I know what it's like. You don't want to feel that you're not doing everything for your child that you possibly can. Letting them be bored is good.
Fantastic. I think there's a lot of people in the chat that really needed to hear that, and it's been keeping me going. So thank you. And I'm gonna pose a question to Mark, just shifting gears a little bit. Many have identified this time as a traumatic event. There's financial challenges, there's job loss, uncertainty, sickness around us, and the inability to experience the outside world. I would love your advice for establishing, effective leadership through times of trauma, and just generally, sort of operating in this sort of state, and maybe a little bit of advice as to if you have any tips as we move through this.
Sure. Well, in a crisis or when people are under stress, most people revert to type, so their basic instincts or personality traits. And for many corporate leaders, that means a singular focus on task. But leaders must also attend to the human side of the leadership equation. And as Napoleon once said, as a leader, you need to be a dealer in hope. A dealer in hope. Now, to give you 5 specific tips, and I think these apply to leadership, but especially so in crisis, and some of them I've alluded to already. Establish a purposeful routine. Add structure to reduce the chaos, and control what you can control. Worrying about things outside of your control is a fool's errand, and it will lead to you being unsuccessful ultimately. The second one is enforce a disciplined approach. So I remember during my initial training, after I had cut some corners and fallen asleep in a trench, a sergeant came up to me, and after he was done yelling, he said, "Mark, you need to act as if the enemy is always watching." And so as we combat this virus, it's not about gaming the system or cutting corners. You must do all the right things, and you must do them all the time when no one is watching, whether that's a supervisor or some other authority. And third, I'll go back to communications, but here structured 360-degree communications. So previously when I talked about comms discipline, that was the how. So here are some thoughts on the what. I think in a crisis, leaders should over-communicate, but that doesn't mean drowning people in a constant flow of data or spitting out seemingly random information. I think information should be structured in a standardized way that everyone recognizes, and it should be consolidated so it's easily digestible. And finally, it needs to have an evaluation, and that evaluation turns that information into knowledge. And that's important because the assessment a leader puts on information provides organizational context for both understanding and action. The fourth point is around accountability and ownership. Strong leaders own their experiences. Strong leaders own their experiences and become better people for them. And so it doesn't matter how we got here. None of us created this pandemic. None of us are responsible for how it started, but still we need to own the situation as it pertains to us. We need to own the problem. We need to own our solutions, and we need to own the outcomes, both good and bad. And I think these behaviors go a long way to establishing or to sustaining credibility and trust. Trust being the #1 determinant of team effectiveness. And lastly, I'll talk about personal resilience. And resilience is it's an iterative process that includes finding strength and meaning and connection between the body, the mind, and the heart and the soul. And I touched on that in terms of the tent routine, needing to create space for all of those things. So the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And as I look back on my military career, we had a notion of mission, people, equipment, self. And that was drilled into us. The #1 priority was always the mission, and then your soldiers, and then all of your equipment, and then last was you as the leader. However, as I've come to understand by learning the hard way, if you don't look after yourself, if you don't take care of yourself, then eventually you will not be able to take care of the others. And so Heather, those are my tips for establishing effective leadership, but especially in times of crisis.
100%, and it was brought up on the call yesterday, 2 days ago actually, by LaFawn Davis from Indeed, about putting your oxygen mask on first before you help others. And I think that's really important during this time. You know, mothers, fathers, everyone making sure that they're taking care of themselves. If they haven't been able to do physical activity because of work before, if there are elements that they can put into their routine, now is the time. I am not necessarily practicing that as much, but I'm trying. We're going for walks around the neighborhood and doing 2 small changes with our family here. I'm going to answer or ask a couple of questions that came into our chat here. This one is from Mita. It is from Betty, and Betty is she's asking. She's got a toddler, and her and her husband are in important roles. So she said, what if both of you have a somewhat important call at the same time? What is your advice in approaching the situation without demeaning the other's work by forcing a solution? I ask because I have a toddler who is quite high maintenance for attention.
That is a really tough question, and I don't have the answer either. So we should move to the next question. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I think that I could tell you what my experience has been and what we're going through. I think, especially when you have a toddler, that's more difficult. I mean, with the 4-year-old, we put a show on, right? Because if we both have commitments at the same time, there's nothing to do. One of the things I've been doing, because this is now everything we're living is the soundtrack of our lives, right? Whether it's kids popping into Zoom or tantrums or meltdowns or somebody busting into your meeting, and this is just the way it is, and we all have to be kind and accept it. I had a call earlier this morning that I had to take, similar. I just actually brought my 4-year-old in and introduced her, and I find that sometimes children are very just curious as to what's happening. And once she saw and met my coworkers, young boys, they both got bored very quickly and moved on. Right? They were like, there's nothing interesting happening here in this corporate meeting. But it's the attention piece and not wanting to feel excluded. So many of us are just role modeling and starting meetings and having our children. They're now occupied right now, so they're not here with me on this call. I think that's one way. And I think I don't have toddlers right now. What I would say to you is I've had a lot of colleagues who have their toddler with them in the meeting and just say, Priya's here with me today, and she's going to be here for the next hour. I have her in the playpen. I have her playing with her toys. She's on the floor, introduce her. And that's just the soundtrack of our lives. And people have to be kind, generous, and compassionate about it.
Agreed. And Betty, I have some advice around that too, because I have a 18-month-old, which I'm feeling is a very difficult age to be in this pandemic right now. Similar thing happened to me yesterday. Fortunately, my husband's suffering from seasonal allergies and was really unwell, and I had an afternoon of calls. So I just had to I just told them that I'm going to be taking these calls, and you're going to hear lots of background noise. And I had both kids, 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I think at the beginning of the call it was a little bit shocking to this person as to just how noisy it was. But I think you just have to be vulnerable, and you just need to be honest. And I think that there is a lot of compassion out there. And interestingly enough, I think this will, for a lot of people, determine which companies are accepting and flexible with kids and which aren't. And there's going to be situations that come up where they feel uncomfortable, but maybe at the end of the day, it's best to figure out the bosses or the companies that are accepting of this and those that are not. So there is no short answer, but that's my feedback. And I don't know if Esther, if you wanted to add to that, I saw you nodding. So we have a couple more questions that's just popped into the chat here. What do you think employers can do to support the well-being of employees as working parents are really feeling the pain? So kind of echoing on some of the earlier items that we talked about, but is there one sort of system that you've seen? And it actually follows on to one of my other questions, which is what changes in the corporate structure could come out of COVID-19, and how do you see them benefiting in the long run? Who wants to take this one? Esther?
Esther, go. Please go, Esther.
So I think that it's going to take a while, first of all, for us to come out of this. It's not going to happen May 8th, like everybody predicts. It's going to be longer. And I think that the corporate structure has to give parents more flexibility and trust them to be able to achieve what the goals of the company are at home. So I think there might be a combination of working at home more and then also working in the office more. And I think that companies that trust and respect their employees and believe in them. Basically, when they do that, the employee feels trusted and respected and then rises to that occasion. You tend to respond when you think people think highly of you. You tend to achieve at those levels. So I think the way we work is going to be changed for the next, my prediction is all the way through the summer, because I don't see this virus going away anytime soon. And China just admitted that they had reduced, let's say they had faked their numbers. And so they're 50% higher than what they originally said. And New York is still facing 2,000 people a day being admitted to the hospital. So, you know, where are we? This is like, you know, we're middle of April. It's not going to end in 2 or 3 weeks. So I think that, you know, it'd be great if we could all see each other again, in person, that is. I just don't know when it's going to happen. But so that's my response. I'd like to hear what Mita and Mark think.
I would jump in and agree with everything Esther said. I think companies have a big responsibility to help with emotional well-being. All organizations do, and mental well-being. I think we each have a huge responsibility. Like, we each have to draw our own boundaries. And what do I mean by that? Yesterday, I just realized that I no longer have a commute time. And I used to complain about my 75 to 90-minute commute, which has disappeared. And so why am I consistently working around the clock, either with my kids or showing up here at my laptop? Well, that's on me. Like, I should block that out as time for me. The half hour in the morning where I would be, actually, I'm being generous, it would usually be 75 minutes of, you know, driving through potholes and listening to music and doing my Starbucks stop, but that's on me. Like, I have given that time up. So I think to also look at your calendar and block off the times, and again, try to create some semblance of routine. And I think, you know, leaders who are leading with compassion and kindness and generosity, and allowing and almost giving permission and role modeling and talking about the ways they're engaging in self-care, I think is so important. And I think this idea of letting people manage their own schedules and not micromanage them. The last thing I would say is, like, this idea of almost like over-connecting. I'd written a piece not too long ago entitled, "Please Don't Invite Me to Another Virtual Happy Hour," because, you know, I get the intent and I love it, but at the end of the day, I might just want to go to bed, or I might want to sit and drink with my husband, even though we're in the same house. I never really see him. So the intent of leaders, of course, it's a good intent. It's the intent versus impact. And depending on where you are in your professional journey, you might feel obligated that you have to attend all these virtual happy hours and wear like a silly hat or bring a certain kind of beer. And just really being cognizant of the fact that people just might want to just shut everything off and stare at the wall. And that's okay.
That is so true. And, you know, I think there is place for all of that, and there's a lot of people that can enjoy the virtual happy hours. But yes, like many of us, we don't have the time, or we have other priorities that we need to focus on. So I 100%, I feel you on that. Now, Mark, did you have some perspectives on, you know, how this may change as we sort of move through the next little while?
What I've seen from many clients is getting over that trust barrier of no longer being able to see people and see what they're working on. So I think corporations, organizations, team leaders, but even individuals, how do we measure success and output? And, you know, we always knew it wasn't always time-based, but yet that remained the easiest thing to measure. So how do you measure progress on a project when you're all dispersed now? And what does it mean to do work when you're no longer in the same location and working in those same core hours. And trust has a lot to do with it. But also just having a really good sense for what success looks like.
100%. And I am, I could probably talk to you guys for another hour. There are so many things that this call has brought up in terms of, allowing to have the routine, but also create the space for boredom. We have mentioned a number of resources on the call today. Esther had some really great apps. We had some questions around some other tools at home for toddlers. We're going to compile, there were a lot of questions we couldn't get into, but I'm going to compile a pretty good resource pack for our email that's going to go out next week with all of the recordings of all of the videos for this week. And I wanted to just thank all of the panelists, Mark, Mita, Esther. Thank you so much for being on the call today. And for all the panelists that joined earlier in the week, we had some great discussions as well. So thank you for attending the call. If you want to stay connected with W North, I encourage you to check out some of our programs. We're going to send some more information about our online membership that will be relaunching next week. And yes, have a great weekend. If you can mark it as a weekend somehow, I am looking for ideas instead of a Groundhog Day every day, which it feels like. But thank you again, and we will see you all soon.